to order at 11:14 a.m. This is a meeting of the Governance Committee of the New York State Limerick Regional Development Authority. Thank you all for attending today. We have committee members joining remotely via teleconference as well. To the public viewing, thank you for joining. Renee, may we have a roll call to confirm a quorum is present?
Chris Pushkarsh.
Here.
Diane Monroe.
Here.
Steve Hunt.
Here.
Art Lucy.
Here.
Joe Martens.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Renee. An agenda was included.
Betty's here too, Chris, just for your information.
Thank you, acknowledging senators in the room. An agenda was included with the committee materials. Please note that this committee meeting is being recorded. A link to the video and transcription will be posted on the Olympic Authority's website following this meeting. Committee members and all speakers, please speak as clearly as possible and identify yourselves each time you speak, or in the case of committee members, make a motion. The first item on our agenda is approval of meeting minutes. May I have a motion approving the minutes of our last meeting held on September 22nd, 2023?
So moved, Art.
Thank you, Art. Motion by Art. Second.
Second by Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the revised and updated Code of Ethics Policy and proposed resolution number 523. Michelle, will you please provide some background to the committee regarding this item?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, no, this is okay. So this policy has been updated to reflect the change from the previous Joint Commission on Public Ethics to the Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government throughout. The most significant change to the policy is the update from the previously stated rules on nepotism, which prohibited relatives from working in the same chain of command, no matter how broad that chain of command is. And we now have a more flexible interpretation of that part of the law that allows us to have relatives in the same chain of command as long as we have an alternative form of supervision so that they are not reporting to somebody that they are related to. We also reserve the right to rethink those kinds of alternative arrangements if for any reason it is not working to have two employees working closely in a chain of command. That is a very positive change for us because as a large employer in a small area, we have a number of relatives working in the same venues. We do not have a lot of situations where we have relatives in the same chain of command. We've worked very hard to hire people and not put ourselves in that position, but where it can't be helped, it now gives us much more flexibility in those situations. We also clarified the definition of interested sources, just so it's clear as to what constitutes an interested source for the purpose of the gift provisions. We've clarified the travel cost and honoraria and complimentary attendance at certain widely attended events. We clarified that policymakers, staff who are classified as policymakers are required to have prior written approval for outside activities, and they have to report any earnings over $5,000 a year. And that they have to report earnings and they have to report earnings over $5,000 a year and have approval from the Ethics Commission for those outside activities if they're paid. Finally, we clarified the political activities section to clarify that there should not be any political clothing worn at work, just to avoid those kinds of appearances. Does anybody have any questions about that?
I do. There's a language in the proposed policy, it may be in the current one, that speaks to conflict of interest, and it says actual, apparent, or potential. And that's a little bit different than the language in the Public Officers Law 73 itself. And I was wondering why that, specifically a parent, because a parent is a pretty soft word. And it makes me think, I wonder who, a parent to whom, whereas other languages can reasonably assume, things like that. So where did that word come from? And is it something you feel is important? Because I didn't see it in the actual law.
The law does cover appearances as well as actual conflicts of interest, and it is something that we need to always be cognizant of. It is vague. I agree with you. It is it is in the eye of the beholder. But if there is the potential of having an appearance issue, it is something that we should discuss. As I've told employees many times, if somebody disagrees with my position on an ethics issue, they are free to go over my head to the Ethics Commission and ask the experts who deal with this every day whether they agree with me or disagree with me. I don't feel bad about being overruled. But it is something that if the potential is there, if the appearance issue is potentially there, we should at least discuss it and determine how we're going to move forward.
Okay, all right, thank you. The only other question I had was the relationship between policy and procedure. So we adopt the policy and then employees get some kind of a notebook or handbook, or my understanding is maybe it's even online where they can go in and see those policies. Are procedures included there? So for example, you view what you believe is nepotism or conflict of interest or something that violates in this particular policy, but it could be any policy. Is in each case, is the path spelled out for them as to if they or we or anyone sees this, where they go?
The Code of Ethics that we are presenting here to be adopted as the Code of Ethics policy is what is online and available to employees. It is in what are called their Workbright accounts. They are trained. They are trained on this policy every year. New changes in the Ethics Commission's rules require us to do in-person training every other year. So I have just completed in-person training with all employees.
Oh, believe me, I know.
and both my training and this policy state that I am the ethics officer for the agency. I am the person to come to with those kinds of questions, or the Ethics Commission, or both of us. As I said, if you don't like what you're hearing from me, you're free to go over my head to the Ethics Commission.
Okay. It's a little scary. It's a little scary for an employee, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
I try in the training to make it as not scary as possible and make myself accessible to people. And a lot of people have come to me. I think that we've got an okay procedure in place.
Okay. And what about training for supervisors? I understand there's training on the policy, but you know, do we work with our supervisors at all to kind of help them? Do we work with our, you know, at all to try to help them understand how to approach things as they're questioned?
About ethics or about something else?
About ethics. Because this policy caused me to ask some questions in my own brain, and because some things have occurred that have made me wonder about how we train our supervisors. Specifically to this, how would you approach training supervisors if somebody has a question about something in the ethics? Would you?
Questions about ethics should be directed to me. That we would not encourage supervisors to make decisions about interpretations of the law. The things that are clearly spelled out in our policy should be enforced. But if there are questions about interpreting the policy or the law, those questions should be directed to me or to the Ethics Commission attorney of the day. And that's part of the training.
Okay. So if it's an absolute clear piece, because there is some parts of this that are not at all questionable.
Absolutely. There's a lot of questionable areas of the ethics law, and that's why the Ethics Commission is there I talk to them all the time about questions that come up because I'm not always sure.
All right, very good. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
And on this point, Michelle, a supervisor who is approached or witnesses or becomes aware of a potential ethically sensitive situation, they are in fact trained to know to go to you as well.
Yes.
Right. So
Yes.
just to kind of restate what you just said, there's no lapse in our training of supervisors or other employees about this same standard, which is to push matters of this nature, questions of this nature up to your office or to the commission itself.
Exactly. Yes.
Very good.
Thanks.
I have
Any,
a,
I'm
I
sorry,
have
go
a
ahead.
question, Chris,
Sure.
and
Please.
it's back to Michelle. And how do we, so if we have employees who want to speak at a conference, it has to be less than $5,000?
No. If we have employees who want to speak at a conference, and there is a difference, the difference in the level of income is directed at policymakers because and people have to file financial disclosure forms.
Okay.
That's where that comes in.
So who's that?
Designated policymakers and anybody earning over a certain threshold per year. I think right now this threshold is $105,000. That's all part of the training as well.
We
And-
just certified the list not too long ago.
Yes, and they get notices.
Employees.
And anybody who's subject to that requirement gets notices every year through HR that they are required to file. So this isn't, nobody has to guess as to whether they're required to file. So that's where that comes in. But if somebody wants to speak at a conference, it depends, and we've had both situations come up. If it's something that's directly related to their job, so they're they do something for us, like when or an example is Cindy, when she speaks at the end at some of the ski conferences about safety, that is directly part of her job. So those travel costs are paid for either by us or sometimes the people who are putting on the conference. Those are travel costs. Honoraria is where somebody is asked to speak or perform some other function in connection with an outside activity that is not part of their job, but a third party wants to pay those costs. Those also have to be cleared through me to be sure there isn't a conflict of interest. And then they can't use state time, they can't use state resources. So there could be those two situations, but in all situations, I have to sign off on it before they can agree to do it.
And another question has to do with when people retire, resign, or are terminated. Does ethics come into play as to what functions they can do for us?
When somebody leaves, yes. When somebody, well, not so much the retirement, but if somebody leaves us and is not retiring, there are certain restrictions on what they can do. If they want to work for us again, there is one level of process they have to go through. If they want to work in the private sector and are going to interact with us, that's where the 2-year and lifetime bars come in, and those are different reviews.
So there is a 2-year ban on virtually everything. You're not supposed to intersect with your former agency. If you're in a private sector job, for example, it's a 2-year absolute ban. After the 2 years, it is only on issues that you were directly involved with in your employment, in this case with ORDA, that you'd be barred from.
And even in those cases, there's a list of 8, 10 criteria that are examined to determine whether you can interact, how much you can interact, that becomes a much more detailed analysis.
But what I'm struggling with is when we have people who have recently retired from ORDA and they want to help us volunteer at events, how does that work?
That's generally not a problem.
Okay. So how about if they're an independent contractor?
That's where we have to, well, if they're an independent contractor, now they're in the private sector. And that's where the 2-year and lifetime bars come in. Generally speaking, Art, the answer to your question is I pick up the phone, call the Ethics Commission, and we walk through this because these can be very nuanced analyses.
Right.
And there's a lot of very factual determinations that go into case by case determinations. It's really not an absolute.
Okay.
The process is absolute, but the answer is not. It's not the same in every situation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Art and Diane. Are there any other questions, or does anyone want to have any further discussion about this? Hearing none, I'll just mention, Michelle, in your very thorough memo with regard to political activities by employees, I just wanted to point out that as well as, not bringing political materials, clothing, hats, etc., into the workplace, there is also that corresponding prohibition on using authority resources or clothing, for example, when an employee is attending political functions, in a sense, also kind of projecting some connection between the authority and whatever the nature of that political function or activity is.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I discussed that in the training as well, that if you're doing something outside of work on your free time, you have the right to do that, but you should not wear any ORDA clothing or tie your ORDA position to it in any way. And social media as well. If you're active on social media at home, that's fine. Just make sure that you don't tie your ORDA job to anything that you are politically active with. I mean, my basic summary is just keep the two separate all the time. And to avoid problems.
Yeah.
Right. And it bears, as I know, we all know through constant refreshers of these issues, it's really easy to leave the wrong coat on and end up in the wrong place inadvertently. So thank you for covering all this so well. And I'll just ask again, anyone have any final comments? If not, thank you all. And may I have a motion to recommend that the Board of Directors adopt proposed Resolution 523 as presented?
So moved, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. Do I have a second?
Steve Hunt, second.
Thank you, Steve. Any further discussion?
So I'm noticing that we don't have our table full of lovely faces anymore. Are they still there?
No one's left the room.
Okay. Oh, there you are.
I've still got them. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Hearing none, the motion carries. And thank you. May I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss the employment history of a particular person and matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person?
So moved, Diane.
Thank you, Diane. And a second?
Steve, I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Hearing none, the motion carries. Our meeting will go into executive session and the live recording will resume after the board votes to resume public session. executive session and resume the public session. No action was taken during the executive session. As well, that concludes the business of today's governance committee meeting. Are there any other items? Hearing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Real quick, our next meeting.
So move.
I'm sorry?
We talked about a meeting in April. Is that date set? I'm juggling my calendar.
We have, right now, there's a board meeting scheduled for April 12th. We would look to add a governance committee. We'll likely move the audit committee off of that schedule.
Perfect.
The governance committee, but we can resend around an updated calendar for the year of board and committee meetings.
April 12 is good, okay. All right, and if there's anything that you need from us in the interim to support your work, just give us a heads up because it's really good work and I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Agreed. Are there any other items? If not, can I have that motion to adjourn?
Steve, I'll move.
Thank you, Steve. And second?
Second, Art.
Thank you, Art. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned at, we're working at 12:42 this afternoon. Thank